And I think a lot of our personality comes from that, but I'll get onto that later on. Yeah, so that was the 1640s. Let's fast forward up until the end of the 18th century, the 1790s. So as I was saying, guys, don't worry. If you hear me saying 1640s, I'm not going to go 1650s, 1660s, 1670s.
Yeah.
So, okay. What's happening in the world in the 1770s, 1780s? USA established. I'll tell you, Ma. The USA was starting. And who came to the USA initially? English planters, English settlers who related to these people who became known as Ulster Scots. The province of Northern Ireland or the province that Northern Ireland is in is called Ulster. So these people became known as Ulster Scots because they had Scottish heritage. So these Ulster Scots went over to the US of A, started to make a home over there, and these people would have been predominantly descendants of Irish, Germans, English, etc. But the USA struck out for independence in the 1770s. They had a Declaration of Independence, the 4th of July, all that good stuff. In France, they had the Vive la Révolution, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake, all that kind of stuff. They went from being a monarchy to a republic. So Irish eyes were saying, whoa, hold on a minute here, that's a great idea. Establishing a republic? Wow, I want me some of that.
I want me
some of that. Yeah, boy. Why am I talking like I'm from Oklahoma?
I want me a republic. Yeah.
Kind of like Forrest Gump there. But Irish people were looking over towards different countries and getting influence from these people. They remember the Norman invasions, etc. So a new generation of Irish said, we're going to be the heroes. There was an association set up in the 1790s in Ireland called the United Irishmen. And I love the concept of this because it didn't matter whether you were Catholic, Protestant, purple, white, black, polka dot. It didn't matter. If you fell under the banner of an independent Ireland, you're in the club. And I like that notion. It didn't matter what your religious persuasion was. As a matter of fact, some of the most important Irish men and women who fought for Irish freedom were Protestant. And the man I'll talk about from the 1790s was a man called Wolfetone. His name was Theobald Wolfetone. And he was a student at Trinity College in Dublin. Just regular run-of-the-mill student who had aspirations to overthrow a British monarchy and establish an Irish republic. Just a casual student. He actually went over.
That's a regular guy.
He's a regular dude, He's like, how was school today? Hey, man, I've got plans for a republic. So he went over to France. And he wanted to get to know the French. He wanted, hey, how did you guys do this? How did you overthrow your monarchy? And then become a republic. He built contacts in the USA. Hey, how did you defeat the British and establish your United States? And so he was kind of doing his research. Came back to Ireland. They tried to hold like a rebellion in Dublin, which lasted for about like 1 day or 2 days.
I thought you were going to say like 2 hours.
Yeah, it was almost the equivalent of it. It was an absolute disaster. He tried to set off some gunpowder, blow up some buildings near Dublin Castle. Nothing happened. It was over. But it led to a regrouping of what we call in Irish as the 1798 Rebellion. And that's where predominantly actually County Wexford, I wouldn't say it started in Wexford, but one of the most famous battles was a place called Vinegar Hill in County Wexford. But we were originally going to get help from the French. The luck of the Irish, they say we're always lucky. Maybe not.
Or maybe you are. Maybe that's exactly why they say it,
Yeah, maybe sarcastically almost, like, yeah. So what happened was, Theobald Wolfetone said to the French, hey, listen, we're Irish. We don't have a lot of help. Do you guys want to help us? And the French said, of course, oui, sacré bleu. And so they said, we will bring some ships over to Ireland. We'll meet you off the coast of Cork. We'll meet up there, and then we'll force our way up to Dublin. We'll take the English by force. Nope.
Did not happen.
This did not happen. The French decided to surprise the British by landing wintertime. Not a great idea because choppy weather, dark seas, thunderstorms, and that's exactly what happened. The French wanted to land. There was Irish people there ready to meet them, and the French were just kind of like, oh, no way. Yeah, I think we need to, how's the Wi-Fi on the boat? They're texting people that, listen, group chat, can't make it over, bad weather, I'm going back home to France where it's lovely and warm. And so that was the 1798 rebellion kind of quashed. Old Wolf Tone was found very soon after this on a ship off the coast of, I think it was Cork. Correct me if I'm wrong. And he was rounded up by the British, and he was sentenced to prison in Dublin. He avoided the hanged man's noose by slitting his throat.
Oh.
That was the end of Theobald Wolfe Tone and the 1798 Irish Rebellion. As I said, there was some kind of pockets of battles around Ireland then in 1798 where we tried to take on the English, weren't very victorious, but yeah, it was one of the first strikes in modern Ireland for independence. Yeah. So there you go. That's the 1798 rebellion.
Wow.
We're going into the 19th century, guys, if you're still okay there.
Whoa,
We're going into the
good.
19th century. I wonder what happens next, because this story is
That's
making
when the
me
first
just...
pub was open. Yay.
Oh yes, finally something like positive.
First pub. That's Sean's Bar in Athlone. That was around since Viking times, since the 10th century. Yeah?
Oh, that happened a while ago then.
They have been drinking.
Stage. Actually, 1759 was when Guinness was established. 40 years before that 1798 Irish Rebellion.
There you go.
Yeah, a little fun fact about Guinness, actually. I know I'm giving all you guys out there information about, the basics of Irish history, but a little fun fact about Guinness. It was established by a man called Arthur Guinness, and he initially tried to sell Guinness to the British. The British didn't really like it, sold back to the Irish, and the Irish loved it. Where the land is now settled, where the Guinness storehouse is and all that's in the property of the Guinness family for the next few thousand years. There's a lease on that, and I think they pay off €50 every year or something to maintain peace. But it was initially going to be sold over to the British. But it's become known as an Irish company. So there you go. Okay.
That's crazy.
The pubs. It is nuts. It is nuts. Okay, so you were talking, Matt, you wanted some happiness. I don't have any.
Let's go into the next chapter then.
19th century, something that's not happy whatsoever. Yeah, the famine. We're up to we're up to the middle of the 19th century. Yeah. So you ask one Irish person's opinion on the famine, they'll tell you one story. You ask another Irish person's opinion on the famine, they'll tell you another story.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people say they call it a famine. Other people, just a black and white issue. The potatoes failed. It was a famine. It sucked, and that's what happened. Or you'll talk to other people who'll call the famine or what happened between 1845 and 1850 as a genocide. In other words, it was an attempt by the British to exterminate the Irish as a race of people, and they would have done that. Yeah, and they would have done that by using the potato as an excuse. And what I mean by that is, and I was fascinated to learn this, the potato crop, it wasn't a case of the potato crop failing in Ireland and then the Irish people starved. It wasn't like it was the only food we had. You have to remember, we were farmers for thousands of years. If you remember episode 1, I was talking about the early Irish, the farmers at Newgrange. We were no mugs. We had wheat, we had barley, we had cattle, we had meat. We didn't have to just rely on one crop.
Yeah.
So this kind of concept that we had this over-reliance on a potato is a little bit kind of crazy when I stop to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what I'm getting at is that the people who think it's a genocide are of the opinion that, how can we say, they'll use the potato as a front, as an excuse to exterminate the Irish. And they would have done that by means of, believe it or not, exporting our other foodstuffs, our other food supplies abroad. That they'd export, and they'd price the Irish local farmers out of the market. They'll say, no, this is going for export. We have to drive a higher price that the Irish couldn't afford. So it wasn't really a clear case. We had other food groups. We just had no access to them. When you talk about the breakdown of the famine, Dublin was probably the only place in Ireland, I don't mean went untouched by the famine, but certainly didn't have, the starvation and the hunger that happened on the west coast of Ireland, the likes of Galway, the likes of Mayo, County Clare, County Kerry, the rural areas of Ireland. To this day, Edu and Ma, you guys have lived in Ireland for many years. You've been on the west coast of Ireland many times. And I'm sure any of my our Brazilian friends who are watching this will agree, if you've been around Ireland. You have large towns, and then you have Dublin, and then you're driving on the motorway. It's just green fields, stone walls,
Yeah.
and you'll see like these kind of cottages that are just in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they would have had their origins in the 19th century. These would have been abandoned buildings. These would have been people who were fleeing to America, Canada, Australia, and coincidentally enough to England, where a lot of people say the problem started.
Mm-hmm.
So to this day, you know, we're still trying to establish infrastructure on the west coast of Ireland. Our language hasn't recovered since the famine, and our population hasn't recovered since the famine. At the time of the famine, the population of Ireland was touching on 8 or 9 million. By the end of the famine, we had something like 6 million, 5 or 6 million. So 1 million Irish people had died of starvation. A further 1 million had to emigrate for a better life. Irish people weren't allowed to speak the Irish language. If we were caught speaking the Irish language, we were hung, we were drawn, we were quartered, we were thrown into prison, whatever the British wanted to do with us, because at this stage, yeah, we were part of the British Empire. So, you know, up until, like, same with Oliver Cromwell, Irish people still have a bee in their bonnet about the Great Famine or the genocide. Again, it's whatever. I'm not going to take sides on it. I'm just, you know, purely historical basis. I want to kind of give two sides, and then you guys who are watching this video can be the judge of that if you want to do your own research. But much like Oliver Cromwell, it still kind of strikes a bit of a chill for Irish people. So yeah,
completely understandable. Come on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even to this day, you know, like in English media, like there was references to, like, you know, like something like 5 years ago in the Brexit negotiations, the high-rising British politician, won't name any names or anything, but this politician particularly said, you know, about like when the Irish were kind of talking about the question of Northern Ireland in part of the Brexit negotiations, because Northern Ireland, it's part of the United Kingdom, but it's on the island of Ireland. So there's always the question about like border and supply, trade agreements. What was spoken about was, what this politician said was, what do the Irish want? Do you want us to starve them with potatoes again?
Wow.
Like,
come on.
Man.
This is like 4 or 5 years ago. It's like,
no,
like threatening to starve us with via potatoes again.
In obviously different, like not comparing.
These kind of references, like even a few years. Oh, it's crazy, guys. It's crazy. Like, I remember 8 years ago, I went to like this rock music festival in England, the Download Festival. Metallica were playing, Black Sabbath, Megadeth, and all this kind of. And me and my Irish friends went over, and we were all drunk on the first day. We went to the campsite, and we found this guy was selling an Ireland flag. And we were like, "Yeah, we'll take this." We're feeling patriotic after 17 beers, as everybody does. And we got like this bamboo stick, and we got this Irish flag, and we kind of attached it as an extension to the bamboo. We broke the bamboo, and it was kind of like 15 feet high in the air. And we kind of set what we called Camp Ireland. So kind of any Irish people would kind of just flock, and we're all like one little posse, you know, kind of like how our friends from Brazil kind of live with each other, drink with each other, and talk about Brazilian things. We were kind of having our Irish thing for a few days. And the funny thing was, like, the English people were being really nice about it, actually. You know, so that's the other side of it. You know, I'm talking about, you know, the bad English and potatoes and famine. These people come over, shake our hands, bring a beer, and sit down with us. And they'd say things like, "Oh, potato, potato, potato." And, like, you know, this kind of stereotype of, like, us, like, all we know about is potatoes. And I remember I was even queuing to get into the venue. And this girl, she was English. I was just talking to my friend from Dublin, and she turns around to me and she says in that lovely English accent, "Oh my God, keep on talking." And I said, "What?" And she's like, "Your accent is amazing." Oh,
I love your British accent, Ross.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ma. I just wanted to slip in a bit of English right there, mate. You know what I mean? You know, I wanted to kind of throw a little bit of light and shade. Like, you know, it's very easy in the context these videos to go, the English. But man, I've got lots of friends from England, and they're lovely. It's the same way. I'll get onto it maybe in a few minutes about conceptions of the Irish in the 1970s in England when we had our troubles in Northern Ireland. But anyway,
you mentioned something that's it's quite interesting, because we didn't have such a, you know, pressure or like oppression in Brazil like that. And the closest comparison I can make, and that's probably like a bit, you know, closer to our, you know, generation. is the Nazism, you know, like in Germany against Polish, against that kind of control. It's kind of like similar to a point where obviously you want to kill a race based on whatever you came up with. And it doesn't blame. There's still like good German people, obviously. It happened in the past, and I'm just trying to make like a comparison to the point of like that's why some people may still have a little bit of like a feeling, a bad feeling, but still they don't like the new generation is not the blame. They want to blame. It happened in the past.
Exactly, you're dead right. I mean, we have to learn from the past and to have a better future. It's a good comparison. And you know, talking about the word genocide, that word, I was actually kind of listening to a podcast, an Irish history podcast yesterday, and the guy, his name is Finn Dwyer. He has something called the Irish History Podcast on Spotify. I don't know the guy, so it's not even like a plug for a friend, but check it out. Really, really cool Irish History Podcast. Obviously for you guys watching maybe from Brazil, your English level would need to be pretty good. He's kind of speaking fast native Irish, but if you're confident enough with your grasp of English, but to get back to it, you know, the word genocide only kind of started to appear after World War II. And that's when people in Ireland started to use that word. Before that, it was the famine. And then when they heard about Belsen, Auschwitz, etc., and the atrocities that happened there, that's when it really kind of became a different entity. So that was the famine.
That was the famine. And well, let me see. I'm gonna try to. Yeah, because I was like, I think from what I remember from Irish history, I think that's the last really bad thing.
Yeah.
Well, there's civil war. I mean, if you
the last major. Yeah. I mean, if you offer perspective, you know, the 1840s were less than 200 years ago. So when you look at, you know, modern history, or stretching back to where we began, it was 10,000 years ago. It's still pretty, I don't mean current, but it's ripples, its reverberation is still felt. And that's what I touched on a few minutes ago in terms of our population never recovered and our language never recovered. Because we're allowed to speak our language.
But still, like, you guys are pretty good at, you know, speaking your language, because if you think of Brazil, for instance, you know, we don't have really anything left from Tupi and Guarani except from some names of rivers and cities, but people don't really know how to speak it, and you still learn it at school. I mean, even though most of you don't speak it fluently when you leave school, it's still there. It's still part of, you know, your education, and I think that is really precious and it's really nice.
I love it. You're dead right, Ma. And for me, it's absolutely vital. It's vital. I don't want to talk about the Irish language for too long, but just to touch on it for 2 minutes. As you rightfully, for anybody who's watching, in Ireland we speak Irish, or well we use it as a subject, should I say, for 13 years, from the age of 4 or 5 years old until we're 17 or 18, whenever we finish school. It's one of 3 core subjects: English, Irish, and mathematics. And unfortunately, the thing about the Irish language is, unless you're from a particular area in Ireland where there's still pockets of little bits of Irish being spoken, again, on the west coast of Ireland, the kind of isolated areas of Ireland, Galway, Mayo, all those areas of Ireland, they the highest percentage of native Irish speakers. So over here on the East Coast, in Dublin, in the capital, the rest of Ireland kind of call us, you know, West British and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to keep up our native language when we don't use it every day at home, you know? When we come home from school, we don't say, Kunna satatu awami, call will my dinner, which is, hello, mother. Where's my dinner? What's for dinner? You know, it's like, we say, hey, mom, what's for dinner? So when you guys know, our Brazilian friends watching us here as well, if you don't practice it, if you don't use it, you lose it. But I've got some good news now, Ma, leading into the end of the 19th century. Good news. Finally. So, at the light of the tunnel, a little bit of a rainbow happened here in Ireland. So, okay, the famine.
Oh, look what I've got for you, Ross.
Oh, yeah.
A little rainbow.
Oh, thank you. You're my little ray of sunshine. Thank you. Actually, another Irish stereotype. We've got a crock of gold at the end of the rainbow. The leprechaun is there. So, The end of the 19th century was a revitalization of Irish culture. There was a whole generation of people that didn't grow up with the famine. The famine ended in 1850, 1851. In the 1880s was the establishment of something called the Gaelic League, which was a rejuvenation of Irish music, Irish heritage. You guys, Edu and Ma, will have heard of something of the GAA, the Gaelic Athletics Association, Gaelic football, hurling, all these sports. The modern version of what we now know as those sports, they became regulated in the 1880s. And to this day in Ireland, I was the same. When I was a kid, I was thrown out onto the pitch to play Gaelic football for my local team. We were made to go to Croke Park to see Dublin. Like it's in our DNA. Like there's no option. It's in Ireland. It's a way of socializing. Like the Gaelic League, is a way of establishing, little things like, even apart from sports. In the 1880s, that's when Irish literature became legal. The British had Irish history book made illegal. So it's the first generation of Irish people who were aware of their history. So, they didn't know about 1798. They didn't know about Oliver Cromwell. They didn't know about the Normans. They didn't know about the Vikings. So in the 1880s, that's when Irish literature became legal. It's why I'm so happy now in 2020, and it's why I'm so happy with being with E-Dublin, to welcome all these new people into my little country that's had just such a crazy, like a bad past. Like I feel very grateful that we're in this position to welcome guys from all over the world. Obviously not now. If you're watching this video in 6 months, please tell me the flights are back to normal. So it was apart from the sports, it was also there's literature and music. And when there was like a politician called Charles Stewart Parnell, a lot of guys from Brazil who live in Dublin, they know of Parnell Street. And they just think of the street with Australiano and Tesco and maybe a couple of language schools near Capel Street. And that's their Parnell Street. The reason why Parnell Street is called that is because of an Irish politician called Charles Stewart Parnell. And the reason why O'Connell Street is called O'Connell Street is because of a man called Daniel O'Connell, whose statue is up the very top. If you're at the O'Connell Bridge end of O'Connell Street, his statue is at the top, and Charles Stewart Parnell's statue is down the very end of O'Connell Street, the guy with the book and the big lovely harp. So two kind of synonymous streets in you had Daniel O'Connell, who was known as the Catholic emancipator. He was around 30-40 years before Charles Stewart Parnell. He helped to bring about equal voting rights for the predominantly Catholic Irish. But anyway, let's go on to Charles Stewart Parnell. He was of the mindset that we didn't have to spill blood to win Irish independence. We could take it back by taking back our land. Because in the 1880s, it was a lot of land in Ireland was still owned by, Anglo-Irish, English landlords. There's still that kind of British association. And what happened was eventually, through a British Prime Minister, Gladstone, there was the first bill known as the Home Rule Bill started to go through British Parliament. And what this was predominantly maybe giving Ireland either some independence or giving it Dominion status, kind of like how you have Canada and Australia today. They're still part of what we know as the British Commonwealth, but they don't really have, they would have they would be independent, but they're still going to have, connection to UK with the Commonwealth. Charles Stewart Parnell, however, he was a very naughty boy. This was Victorian times. He had an affair. Yes, Charles Stewart Parnell had an extramarital affair. Home rule independence for Ireland was shelved. Okay, so we're going into the 20th century, my friends. The dream of an Irish republic had not died.
There was still hope.
There was still hope. We're getting into the hope areas, Ma, to try and give you some hope. The famine was grim. The French trying to help us and getting shipwrecked was grim. Oliver Cromwell killing everybody in Drawdown Wexford was grim. We're into hope. The Gaelic League was a sign of hope. The 1880s, we had Gaelic football. We were dancing. We were back eating our potatoes. It was wonderful. So going up to the beginning of the 20th century. If you remember a few minutes ago, guys, I was telling you about in the 1880s, that's when Irish literature became legal. You have to remember, in the 1910s, so we're looking around 1910, 1911, 1912, these would have been young men who were 31, 32 years old. They would have been born around 1880, 1881. They grew up with Irish literature, and some of these young men who would have went on to like university or whatever, they would have found out about these, you know, events in history. So they said, oh, okay, I think we should strike out for another little bit of independence. Let's try again. 1798 didn't work. Let's give it another go, shall we? So in 1912, there was a political party over in England, excuse me, and there was an Irish party called the Home Rule Party. Very self-explanatory. They wanted to get home rule for Ireland. You have to remember we're still under British rule at this time. So 1912, history repeats itself. Home Rule Bill goes through Parliament in England. Dun, dun, dun. Wait a minute, Ireland. Stop right there. You can't have. Stop right now.
I was thinking the same.
You can't have. Yeah. Let's get a Spice Girls karaoke. E-Dublin next episode. Spice Girls karaoke.
Yeah.
Man, that's a great idea. So again, Irish Home Rule was shelved. Why? World War One. World War One broke out in 1914. Lasted until 1918, so many thousands of Irish people went and joined the British Army. Funnily enough, they needed to get some money from somewhere. So the Irish Home Rule Bill dream was scrapped once more, but it was not. In the background, there was men like Michael Collins, there was Pádraig Pearse, there was James Connolly, there was Joseph Plunkett, there was Eamon Cant, there was Cathal Brugha Street, just off O'Connell Street. Young men, well-read men, who decided to strike while the iron was hot. And what I mean by that is, while the British were distracted in World War One, we said we're going to strike and kind of, you know, catch the enemy unaware, shall we say. And that's what led to what we call the 1916 Easter Rising. So,
Easter Rising!
Yes, now we're up to modern Irish history. 1916, the exact halfway point in World War One. There was what was called the Easter Rising. Yeah, right now we're actually filming this. So the reason why it happened was that we wanted to strike out for independence, and we would strike while basically the British weren't looking. And so by means of taking over buildings in Dublin and by starting a guerrilla war or a rebellion, whatever you want to call it, the Irish would try and take Ireland back by force by taking over key buildings. These key buildings would have included the Royal College of Surgeons, that's just off St. Stephen's Green. Anybody who's walked from the top of Grafton Street down Harcourt Street to go to Dicey's, you would have walked past one of the places where one of the key buildings of the 1916 Rising, St. Stephen's Green. It's now lovely. It has ducks. Yeah. It has lovely benches. But there was people on top of the Shelburne Hotel with sniper rifles. There was like trenches built in St. Stephen's Green. So we're always surrounded by history, no matter where we go in Dublin. And of course, the GPO on O'Connell Street. Many of you guys, if you don't know where the GPO is, the spire, big pointy needle in the middle of O'Connell Street, the big fancy building with the pillars is the GPO. And you can see some of the bullet holes from the 1916 Rising on the pillars. So when you walk past, you shells that ricocheted and stuff like that. So Easter Monday, a man called Pádraig Pearse, a school teacher from Dublin. Yeah, he was a school principal in Rathfarnham, and he walked out in full military uniform, much to the confusion of all the Irish people on their bank holiday weekend, with a piece of paper, and it was called the Proclamation of Irish Independence. And he was reading aloud about our need for independence from the English. And it was a very forward-thinking document because it started off, you know, talking about dear Irish men and Irish women. Up until then, it was all about the men. The men got the spotlight. But hand on my heart, like if it wasn't for the Irish ladies, we would have been screwed. There was a branch of Irish independence called Cumann na Món, which was basically like the Women's Association. And when all these buildings were being taken over in 1916, the wives of these men, the girlfriends, they were nurses, they were like how can I say, messengers, stuff like that. But yeah, I could go on and on about it. But basically, the 1916 Rising lasted for 1 week. The Irish knew that it wasn't going to be very successful, but it was to let the world know we were ready to strike out for independence, and we were prepared for what Pádraig Pearse, the man who read the proclamation, called blood sacrifice. In other words, we needed to spill blood to win our independence. And again, if we want to kind of tie in Irish history, Pearse Street train station is after Porrick Pierce. Okay. Before that, it was just known as Westland Row train station, because that's the street that it's called, Westland Row. Okay, so these men were rounded up and taken to Kilmainham jail in Dublin. I think there was almost 20 men. I think it was over 20 men, if I'm not mistaken. They were taken out, and over a couple of month period, they were taken out by the British and executed at gunpoint. But before this, the Irish people actually weren't too happy with the 1916 Rising. They thought these men were cowards. Why aren't you in World War I? Why aren't you in a real war? And they were spat at, and things were thrown at them. And then all of a sudden, when they heard that these men were being shot, like James Connolly, Porrick Pierce, etc., that's when the public tide started to change. And that's when Irish people became sympathisers. And that's what put the wheels in motion for modern Ireland. And it led to what we call the War of Independence between 1919 and 1921. But I don't mean I'll skip past that, but when the War of Independence broke out, it was between Irish guerrilla war forces and British forces, namely branch of the British that were called the Black and Tans. And they were ex-soldiers from World War I. They were out of work. They answered an advertisement in British newspapers. And the reason why they were called Black and Tans is because they didn't actually have an official uniform. It was like black colored and brown colored and everything. So to cut a long story short, in 1921, treaty negotiations happened in London. Michael Collins was the chief envoy. We had what was called an Irish Free State, which was kind of like Dominion status. This was taken back to the people of Ireland and our government, our provincial government that we established in 1918. The treaty went to Parliament, and what I mean by that is the compromise that was offered was we can offer 26, there's 32 counties in Ireland, 6 are in Northern Ireland, 26 in the Republic of Ireland. We can offer you 26 counties, and 6 counties in Northern Ireland can remain part of the United Kingdom. But you guys can do whatever you want with the 26. And that's pretty much what we have to this day. And the reason why the 6 were separate was pretty much down to religion, was down to faith. A lot of these people in Northern Ireland were Protestant. And how it went was predominantly, if you're of Ulster Scots heritage, you were proud Protestant, and you considered yourself British. If you were from the other 26 counties, you were predominantly Roman Catholic, and you considered yourself Irish. It was almost like this kind of Protestant British, Irish Catholic. It was this separatism. So that was the modern day Ireland.
And with that, we reach independence finally, and then we have basically what we know as Ireland today. I'm sure there's like a lot more that you can tell us about modern Ireland, but that's gonna have to be another video.
Exactly. Yeah, I won't go there. I won't even go there. But yeah, we've led up to the Civil War. We had to have a fight about it for a year before we had our independence as well, of course.
But still, it was worth it.
From the 1920s, pretty much. Absolutely. And funnily enough, Brazil became a republic in 1822. Yeah. Ireland became like a free state, not quite a republic, in the early 1920s as well. So there's only like a 100-year difference between us, if you want to look at it historically. We officially became the Republic of Ireland kind of in 1937. We had our own constitution, which was called Bunreacht na hÉireann, which is still what our laws are gone by today. And in 1949, we went under the name Republic of Ireland. 71 years later, here we are.
Awesome.
Here we are making this video. Ross, it's amazing the amount of stuff. You're like a library of information about history of Ireland. It's just amazing. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us.
No worries at all. I'm always here. And like anytime you guys want to get more in depth, no problem. If anybody watching this wants to, any requests for getting more in depth on a particular part, I tried to glance over it as much as I could. It was a little bit thorough in places, but I hope that was enough for you guys.
Yeah. It was amazing. It was brilliant.
But if you guys like this, the theme, the history of Ireland, and if you want to hear more of Ross telling history, make sure to add the hashtag #VoltaRoss as usual. It's not only for food, it's for history, for music, for a lot of things. We can always make new videos. So thank you so much. And we'll see you again
next week. Thanks for having me, Ed. Thanks for having me, Matt. Stay safe, everyone. Mwah. Beijos.
Obrigada. Tchau.
Tchau.